So welcome to our Resilient Living series, Growing Food in a Changing Climate, Fresh Food, Small Footprint. Now, it's kind of ironic that they asked me to be the MC for this because actually this reflects my relationship with plants. I mean, honestly, my wife and I truly regard gardening as a form of legalized gambling. We usually lose, but we put in our money and we get things and then we either win or lose. But if you're like me, this is the place. And there are people who succeed at this and know a whole lot, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Now this is put on by ANCA, which is Accelerate Neighborhood Climate Action. It's a group that seeks to motivate climate actions at the neighborhood level and has been active in Redlands for just a little over a year and has done a whole lot. And it's been really fun volunteering with them. There's a lot of excitement and grassroots kinds of endeavors and very practical stuff like this. Now, at the end, be sure to check out our resource table. Back here, we have more information about the kinds of things that ANCA is doing. We have some master gardeners who I idolize. I don't know how you do that, but I'm so glad you can. And so you can ask them questions. They have lots of also material to hand out. And they also have some free plants to give away and some free seeds. That is also available. And you can also sign up to have your neighborhood be involved in developing a neighborhood project. That's also in those tables. Now, in terms of our program, we have two presenters. Now, the presenters actually are both from the California Climate Action Corps. And their focus is on how the current food system affects climate change and ways to grow food locally and in more sustainable ways. And it's important. So many things of what we do actually impact the climate and potential greenhouse. And I mean, something as simple as if you get that peach from Chile, you will have incurred a lot more transportation greenhouse gases than if you got it from Yucaipa. And so simple things like that begin factoring in, but it'd be even less if you grew it in your backyard. So that's what they're going to be talking about. Now, our fellows are fellows. They're former fellows, big F fellows, with the California Climate Action Corps, which has been active in California since 2021 and works throughout California, focusing on cultivating climate actions, again, at a local level, and they fund positions such as these fellows. They're actually, we only have two of them here, but we actually have three who are placed this year at the Sustainable University of Redlands Farm, otherwise known as SURF. And now what SURF does is they help with composting operations in the university. What's really cool, literally cool, is they help distribute and plant trees in Redlands neighborhoods who lack tree canopy, and that creates heat islands. And good canopy trees are a critical aspect of managing heat, and this is a part of the country that needs to do that. They also educate students and the community on ways to combat climate change on a citywide scale. So I'll tell you about the two who are going to be talking in just a minute, but I have to give an honorable mention to the third one who's not here, but who put a lot of work into this presentation. So if any of you know him, Brian Miranda Quintana. He is a third-year Climate Action Fellow, and he's also committed himself to the university's Redlands Masters in Science and Organizational Leadership. So, smart guy. And he's been mentoring and guiding, so he gets a mention. Moving on to our two speakers. So, Kali, who, did I see that right? Okay, good. So, Kali Krishnan graduated from UC Riverside with a BS in, get this, Applied Mathematics and Environmental Science with a minor in Public Policy. She's smart. Okay, that was UC Irvine. Okay. She interned with the California Air Resources Board legal team, learning how science and policy interact at the state level. And she is now working with us, but going forward, hopes to complete a master's program in climate change science and environmental system sciences at the University of Graz in Austria. And you can ask her why she chose that one. But that's, and then after that, to work in international organizations on climate change science and policy. So, very good. And then with us also is Calhoun Helmberger. He was raised in Tacoma, Washington, but saw the light literally and has now considered Redlands as his permanent home, where it actually shines the sun. And he graduated with honors from the University of Redlands with a BA in both political science and public policy. Another smart guy. So they have all of these impressive science stuff, and they're going to talk to us about carrots. But that's good. And after his Climate Action Corps fellowship, he hopes to pursue law school and a career law. So we are very fortunate to have them, and I'm going to turn it over to Colin first, and then after her talk, I'm going to turn it over to Calhoun first. Is that right? Okay, sorry, I got that mixed up. And then after Calhoun finishes, we're going to save question and answer for the end. So we'll move right into Colleen's talk, and then we'll do question and answer time after that. Okay. I guess I have to do it, sign and share or something.
So we're actually going to present together, but Calhoun's part of the presentation comes first, so I'll actually give it to Calhoun.
Hello everyone, hope you guys are all doing very well tonight. Enjoying your evening, got through a hump day fairly well. So our talk, growing food in a changing climate. So we're looking at how climate change has impacted current US food systems and also global food systems, as well as how those food systems are impacting climate change and just kind of that self-perpetuating cycle, and just a good practical adaptation that we can all pursue together and individually would be to support urban agriculture in as many ways as possible. Primarily, the most practical one that comes to mind for a lot of people is gardening. So we're talking about ways to go about gardening, ways that if you're not good at gardening, you can find resources, you can find people to help you get good at gardening. There's a UC master's class that I don't think really costs much money at all. You'll learn all kinds of stuff. But I just want to clarify, like our introduction said, I'm a poli-sci, I'm a public policy major, so I really had no background with like gardening, agriculture, any environmental sciencey type stuff, but I've been able to learn a lot through this fellowship program, and it's something that anyone can do. Anyone can do climate action in some way, so I just want to encourage everyone to think on that. So we'll start off, I believe it's down this forward, right? It's down this forward. There we go. Okay, so just kind of a quick overview of what we're going to be starting off talking about. So my kind of area of focus for the presentation is agriculture and its relationship with the climate. So like I was saying, how food will be impacted by climate change, and then also the environmental impacts of the US food industry.
And then I'll talk about what we can do. So yes, we'll hear about all of the issues in the food system, and then we'll see what we can do at the local level. So we'll look at how we can support local and urban agriculture. And then we'll talk about some of the barriers that might prevent people from getting into gardening. And then we'll go into some more technical knowledge on how to start your own garden and how that ties back to climate change.
Okay, so I'm gonna hold it like right here. Sorry, I barely ever talk into a microphone. So just kind of starting off, thinking about food and agriculture is just a basic necessity. Food, shelter, water, these are basic necessities. So I want us all to read this quote. Those of us who are well-fed, well-garmented, and well-ordered ought not to forget that necessity makes frequently the root of crime, It is well for us to recollect that even in our own law-abiding, not to say virtuous cases, the only barrier between us and anarchy is the last 9 meals we've had. It may be taken as axiomatic that a starving man is never a good citizen. This is from Alfred Henry Lewis, a very popular American journalist in the late 1800s, covered a lot of campaigns, kind of was sort of a pioneer to the American political science industry. Now, if this quote seems somewhat familiar, it was also made very, very popular and sort of altered a little bit by Vladimir Lenin. And who would know better about the ways in which necessity can uproot a society and create just absolute horror than Vladimir Lenin. So, because of that, just, in our pursuit of climate action and environmentally friendly agriculture and food production, and climate action as a whole, it is imperative that we all act with the well-being of those who are socioeconomically oppressed and or disadvantaged in the forefront of our minds, and we involve them in the decision-making. And this is an opportunity that I would like to take to praise ANCA. Since we have been working with Linda and ANCA, there have been serious strides made in developments towards bringing in more people in Redlands, people that might not necessarily have the same advantages, and there might be a lot of barriers to climate action for, and I just want to give ANCA a little shout out for really trying to push through that. So it's very, very important. So just to start off, this is all from a report from the United States Department of Agriculture. It was originally published in 2015, but it gets continuously updated on their website. It was most recently updated in November of 2022, so just a few months ago. Yeah, so if you guys, don't trust the poli-sci major, but you can trust the United States Department of Agriculture on this, because that's where this is all from. So, to begin with, climate change is very likely to affect food security at the global, regional, and local levels. And it kind of will look differently at different levels. At the local levels, it might be kind of like how it was at the start of COVID, where we see more empty shelves in the stores. We could see, and we will see, a substantial rise in the cost of food. We've already kind of seen that right now. At the regional level, our food deserts will continue to expand as they have been for the last 2 decades. And at the global level, there is very, very strong potential for widespread famine, which will likely cause a lot of climate refugees and just a serious humanitarian crises, especially in the tropics, so our neighbors to the south. Any climate-related disturbance to food distribution and transportation, internationally or domestically, may have significant impacts not only on the safety and quality of food, but also on food access as a whole. So say we're having something that needs to get shipped across an ocean, right? Okay, well now that we're having these crazy tsunamis off of like the coast of like say Florida, for example, right? There's a boat that needs to get into a port in Miami to drop off all this food. Well, now they can't get there. So that's a problem, obviously, for multiple reasons. Also, impacts on the global food supply concern the United States because food shortages can cause humanitarian crises, as I said earlier, and national security concerns. They can also increase domestic food prices. I just really want to highlight the national security concerns. As I said earlier, necessity really is the driving force of a lot of anarchy, a lot of crime in our country, and as there are multiple statistics throughout the history of the United States that you can look at where there is a direct correlation between food security, shelter security, and water resource security and crime rates. So, about that too. So, climate change is already impacting agriculture in a lot of ways. So, talked about the United States Department of Agriculture. This is a report from the World Bank too, another fairly reputable resource. Climate change's negative impacts are being felt in the form of increasing temperatures, weather variability, shifting agroecosystem boundaries, invasive crops and pests, and more frequent extreme weather events. On farms, climate change is already reducing crop yields, and there will need to be substantial investments and adaptation. Those substantial investments and adaptation will be required to maintain current yields and to achieve production and food quality increases to meet demand. Demand is also increasing. I didn't include this in this specific slide, but if you continue to read this report, you can download the presentation when we're done. You can go and look at these sources. If you read one paragraph further right here, the Earth, we globally need to produce 70% more food by 2050 if we are going to meet the increasing population demands. So, substantial humanitarian crises indeed. And then this is back to the Department of Agriculture. The unfavorable relationship between climate change and agriculture is already being felt primarily in the tropics, as I said earlier. So the tropics, the people living in the tropics, they're going to be the first people to feel the negative effects of climate change and how climate change is going to impact their agriculture, their food industries, and very key parts of their economies. And it will likely force economic downturn, which could in turn force a number of other things such as migration. So kind of just looking at climate change and regional economies. This map might be a little bit hard for some people to see, especially in the back, but it just kind of says what I was already saying. Mainly, especially in the tropics, we're going to see substantial reduction in crop yields and harm to agriculture. And there's a variety of regional economies that are being affected. I've included a few examples here, and these are just a few easy examples that come to mind. So I guess to begin with, we have the fishing industry in Southeast Asia. We have the banana industries in Latin America, and we have agriculture really as a whole outside of the Amazon rainforest. Those industries have all been struggling. Now, these industries specifically are key parts of these economies. All right, the fishing industry in Southeast Asia makes up a crucial part of the economy of Southeast Asia, like especially Indonesia. So you see these places, say there's increased pollution, overfishing, not sustainable practices towards fishing, towards taking care of the water in Southeast Asia. And there's a strong correlation between the downturn of that fishing industry and migration from places such as like Indonesia. You can also, there's same thing for bananas in Latin America and agriculture and outside of the rainforest. And this is from Oxford. So this is likely to further exacerbate current migration trends and patterns, which may present a substantial humanitarian crisis, as the world will face continuous waves of climate refugees. Now, personally, I think that the very process of migration can present a substantial humanitarian crisis. I think that there's a reason why it is such a moral political issue in this country. You know, I think regardless of what your stance would be, you don't want to be seeing kids in cages, seeing refugees come in from Syria. It's sad. You know, these are our fellow humans. So we're going to have to take care of them, and we're going to have to make some substantial adaptations. One of which that is very practical is promoting urban agriculture. So, how will climate change impact our access to food? The U.S. imports roughly 15% of agricultural products, primarily from countries in North America and the tropics. This is from a different Department of Agriculture report that focuses more on trade specifically. Projected reduction in crop yields, along with increasing population and weakened import sources, will cause the cost of food to rise. Food will likely become less accessible, and it is important to adapt our communities to be as resilient as possible. One practical mitigation would be to pursue and support the development of urban agriculture and climate-friendly, resilient food production practices. And this is a practical adaptation. You look at places like Europe, they don't have nearly the same amount of space for farmland. They've been pursuing urban agriculture, trying to utilize as much space as they can. They pursue vertical culture. They have anything that can grow vertically, they have it growing on telephone poles, any kind of pole that they can use in the city, rooftop gardens, aquaponics. These are all great options that we can do practically. Individually, it's harder for us to go out and buy our own aquaponics system, of course. But there's other ways to go about promoting and helping develop urban agriculture. So that first part right there was just kind of, hey, this talk that we're doing right here isn't like, hey, you guys should all get into gardening because it's fun. We all need to do something to support urban agriculture, whether it be gardening, buying locally sourced food, whatever we can do to reduce our carbon footprint that's food related, and also just because we need to pursue all these adaptations because of our changing demands and changing population. So now we're going to talk about the environmental impacts of the US food industry. So just to start off, we have monocrop agriculture and the loss of biodiversity that comes with it. So monoculture removes natural pollination processes, it disrupts natural habitats, usually it depletes the soil of nutrients. This harmful process can really negatively impact a vast array of wildlife which are essential to natural ecosystems, as well as the success of our own agriculture. If all the wildlife surrounding the farmland dies out, and there's no natural processes to promote the growth of new life, then in the long run, it will negatively impact our own agriculture, our own crop yields, and that will hit us right back when we go to the store. Most monocrop culture is devoted, and this is in the US specifically, soy, often exported, corn, most frequently used in the production of corn syrup, but also used for feeding livestock, specifically in red meat production. We'll talk about that later. And wheat, which is used just for a variety of wheat-based products, not just bread, but any kinds of flour. A lot of, really almost any prepackaged food is going to have some kind of wheat product. And I believe, I think it was somewhere in this giant Department of Agriculture report that I had to read, it was like 170 pages. But the majority of wheat goes towards prepackaged goods. So we can really get by without a lot of monoculture in our country. Fertilizer and runoff, this is kind of a common one that people know about. So a lot of farms in the US use industrial fertilizer, which pollutes both the air and the water. It is not only extremely harmful to the natural pollinators, but it can also ravage marine ecosystems. If anyone has any family in the Midwest, specifically the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes areas, that's where my family's from, the marine ecosystems are pretty important. Lake fishing is kind of a cultural staple of that area, and it's being these ecosystems are just being completely ravaged by a lot of this runoff and stuff that is causing these algae blooms and just really damaging these natural ecosystems. Most forms of fertilizer used in the mass production of agriculture are proven to have harmful health consequences for consumers and also for the farm workers themselves. They're just not healthy things to be around. And now kind of talking about the greenhouse gas emissions associated with food production and our food systems. So the production and distribution of red meat, that one is a big producer of methane gas, which is somewhat more harmful than CO2. And then also prepackaged foods, the production of prepackaged foods and all the transportation that's required of prepackaged foods and frozen foods and whatnot. So the production of red meat produces methane gas, and oftentimes prepackaged foods require the extensive traveling of a variety of commodities. So say you go to the store, you get a big frozen lasagna. Okay, well that lasagna has tomato paste that was made from corn syrup, and that corn was grown over here, and tomatoes were grown over here, and that's just the sauce. That's not even getting into the noodles, the meat, everything else. There are all these commodities that are having to travel all over the country, all over the world potentially, just to make that one frozen lasagna. It is not environmentally sustainable whatsoever. Also, land clearing and tilling, the removal of native species and beneficial plants to pollinators. This is also how the Dust Bowl got started, which is kind of a lot of people will know about that because, important for US history. So it releases a lot of carbon that is stored in soil. People don't really know that much. I honestly didn't know that until relatively recently either. I was shocked. You can go and look at various maps that show where CO2 is being released, where the emissions are coming from, and you would be shocked how much CO2 goes over the Midwest, for example, a lot of these agricultural heavy states, in between seasons when they're going through and tilling. It's honestly, it's insane. And then also back to food transportation. So the food distribution process itself can take a lot of transportation. Say you're getting an avocado, but you live in Wisconsin, right? The avocado can be grown in California, but it's gonna have to travel all the way there. And that's just for one avocado. That's not even talking about like prepackaged foods, frozen foods, all this. So it's especially true with prepackaged foods. Please stay away from those. It's not good for your health either. And then these graphs I love right here. So this pie chart on the left focuses on all of the different sources of greenhouse gas emission in the United States. You can see this sliver right here. This is agriculture, 11.2%. However, I will also specify this pie graph. This is from the EPA. This one is from the Department of Agriculture. This one is from a report that specifies that like industry and transportation would also kind of include like food production too. The agriculture is purely agriculture. It's not including the amount of transportation of raw commodities. It's not including the production of things like corn syrup and just examples like that. So if you look at this is agriculture right here. And then this is all of the greenhouse gas emissions attributed to agriculture. So on the left, you have direct nitrous oxide, so fertilizers, industrial fertilizers. It's not good for humans, it's not good for animals, and it's not good for the environment. And then we have direct methane gas, so red meat production. So if you look at both of these side by side, you can see really a lot of our agriculture, a lot of our food consumption related carbon footprint has very, very specifically to do with like eating industrial agriculture's crop yields, and then red meat production, and then prepackaged goods, which fall under the transportation industry category. Now these graphs are from Johns Hopkins, not graphs, pie charts, sorry. So this production, this looks a little bit bigger than what we just went over. I want to say that the Johns Hopkins report specifies that this production is also including the transportation of the raw commodities leading into the final production of whatever food product you are trying to get. So transportation right here, this is just transportation of the final product. So the distribution process right here. So you can see a lot of CO2 emissions specifically with food related consumption. A lot of it is prepackaged goods, unfortunately, so yeah. And then if you look over here, this pie chart kind of gives me hope right here, because you can look at all these different foods and how they're contributing to CO2. So red meat, that's 30% right there. Beverages, sweets, oils, anything with high fructose corn syrup, like that's 21% right there. Dairy products, 18. But look at fruits and vegetables, that's only 11. And that's not even like organic fruits and vegetables. That's like just fruits and vegetables in general. So realistically, the reason why this pie chart gives me hope is that just by modifying your diet to be healthier and kind of having like a more Mediterranean diet, sticking with stuff like chicken, fish, eggs, fruits and vegetables, you've really cut down your food consumption related carbon footprint by like 80% right there. Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome. So there is hope. Let's take a look at what you can do and the ways to promote local and urban agriculture. So supporting local farmers, gardening community gardens, and trying your hand at gardening. And I'm going to hand it over to Callie.
Okay, so now that we heard all the like doom and gloom and some of the like very global stuff, let's go to the local level and see what we can do right here in Redlands. So one of the things we want to do is we want to promote local and urban agriculture, and that's the main, like, the gardening things, where the gardening thing comes in. So the first thing we can do is we can support our local farmers. So we're lucky enough in Redlands to have 2 farmers markets that happen regularly on Saturdays. There is a potential for a new one to open up in downtown. I think it's to replace the original downtown farmers market that was happening in the evenings in the past. But of course, we can go out there, get our local produce. It's super sustainable. We're cutting out that transportation, those emissions from the transportation, as well as just really supporting people who farm locally. Now, if we're wanting to shop at different times during the week, not just on Saturday, we can also visit local farm stores. We do have a wide variety here. We have Sawful, Arnott, Garcia Ranch, Santa Mateo Farms, and Jacinto Farms. And they all have farm stores, and they're open for a large part of the week. Now, if we don't want to leave our house at all, there's another program called CSA Boxes. And CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And basically, these work on a monthly subscription basis. And you get these kind of boxes delivered straight to your door. So just like we see right here. And those are very local, and that's wonderful because it both benefits farmers and the consumers. So for the farmers, they're able to receive payments earlier in the season, knowing that people will be buying those boxes, and they're able to sell to people they know directly in their own area. For us, that's wonderful because we know both who's giving us this produce, and we're able to go visit their farm if we want to. So the second way to promote local and urban agriculture is through community gardens. We actually have 3 in Redlands. Those would be the Smiley Gardens, the Clement Gardens, and the Lagonia Gardens. And we can see that they're up here. So there's a couple plots in each of these gardens, and they're available through the City of Redlands website under Gardens. And these are wonderful programs where you can go out there and really just grab a plot for a small fee, and I believe you hold them for about a year. There's other places to also engage in community gardening both in schools and churches, as well as over at SURF, which is where we work, and the plots are currently only open to university affiliates, but we are hoping to extend that in the future. There's obviously a lot more that can be done with community gardening, and we're hoping that maybe the ANCA neighborhood groups will be able to expand this kind of thing in the future. I want to also mention some other community projects that are happening. So there's a project called Fallen Fruit it was actually started by a group of artists, and their whole intention was, we're creating public art, so why not just add fruit trees to that mix, which seems like a weird combination, but they ended up bringing out public art and then planting trees with the intention of having people grabbing that produce. And just, anyone who stops by can grab some fruits from the tree, and it's a really nice community engagement kind of activity. And there are actually 2 fallen fruit trees up at SURF. So I think there's an apricot and a peach tree, and that's something that's been expanding throughout California. Another way we can engage with our community is through promoting gardening at local schools. There's a program called Roots and Shoots at the University of Redlands that goes out and brings students to these gardens to help out with educating local students about gardening and really just bringing it down to the youth. Okay, and then obviously the third way we can promote local and urban gardening is by trying it ourselves. So before we head into some of those steps to starting your own garden, let's talk about some of the benefits. First of all, there's obviously large benefits in terms of sustainability and the positive impact it has on the environment. By bringing a garden into our house, we're promoting biodiversity, we're removing CO2 from the air by planting our plants, and there's also other benefits in terms of increased nutrition. The produce we grow has a much better flavor than the stuff we get from the store because of how much it's been shipped. And then there's also other impacts like social impacts, such as improved quality of life and sense of well-being and self-esteem, increased personal satisfaction, as well as alleviated depression. Physical health benefits are also a part of something we might want to look into, because when you're going out there, you're gardening, you're getting your hands dirty, you're really moving, weeding, all of that stuff is really beneficial to our physical health as well. And then finally, positive impacts it has on children. This is something that's important when we're promoting schools to start gardening projects with their students. It increases self-esteem for children. They engage in more activities with other students. That increases social skills. They also have much more positive attitudes towards school, as well as an increased sense of responsibility from taking care of a plant or a tree. So this graphic really shows what we can do when we create a garden that's extensive and it's very different from this conventional landscape. If we look at this conventional landscape, this is kind of like a monoculture on a smaller scale. I mean, a lawn is really just one kind of plant, right? So the biodiversity that we're trying to promote here has an increasingly large impact on all the biodiversity we're promoting by just planting more plants, improving the soil health. That all comes with just starting a garden. Before we jump into some more of the technical aspect of gardening, let's see what some of the barriers might be for people in the local area. So one problem might be, well, I don't have the space or the land to start a garden. But let me tell you that it doesn't need to be a conventional garden. We can grow anything on as little space as we want to. So even if you're living in an apartment, you can start a balcony garden, or use hanging planters, pot your plants, or use window boxes. Another newer form of gardening is this what we see down here. This is vertical farming. That can both be done in water or in soil, but it's more of a new form, and it might be a little bit expensive, but it's something we can try. Everything about gardening is very experimental. Then another very small scale kind of farming is microgreens, and that's what we see over here. And that's just, these plants are like 2 to 3 inches tall, and you can grow them on your windowsill. So it's just something really awesome, and they provide a lot of health benefits. And then obviously the other stuff we talked about is joining a community garden, or maybe talking to your landlord if there's a tiny spot of grass that you might be able to use. That would be something really awesome, or just sharing a garden with a neighbor if that's a possibility. Another problem, so what if getting started has these large startup costs? How much does it cost? Well, the costs can be significantly reduced by using resources that you can find in your local community. For example, for soil, city recycling sites or your local green waste site may provide soil at a very low cost, or even free on certain days. Of course, you can also compost your own food scraps and create your own soil through that way. In terms of water, we can collect our own rainwater, whether that be through professional rain barrels or through just creating your own, repurposing containers, anything from the size of a Lowe's bucket to the size of a trash can. Every bit counts, especially here in California, where we get very, very little water. But for the winter and the spring seasons, there is a significant amount of water that you can collect in this way. In terms of seeds, of course, when we're growing things, you can either plant seeds or plant transplants. Seeds tend to be a lot cheaper, so that would be an effective route to go. The master gardeners also sometimes hand out free seeds. I don't know if they have any today, but they do sometimes. And then we also, with other tools, sometimes the IERCD, the Inland Empire Resource Conservation District, has garden kit giveaways, just really looking around in the community for those resources. Finally, another problem we might have is once we get started with gardening, what if I have a question? Who do I ask? I'm going to point out the Master Gardeners again. The Master Gardeners are really awesome at answering questions. So if you ever have any questions, they have a helpline. This is the link for it. But really just Google Master Gardeners San Bernardino helpline. And you can email them any questions. And the more pictures and more detail you provide, the better they can help out. And the cool thing about them is that all of their answers will be research-based, so they are very well knowledgeable on anything gardening. And another thing about them, they hold monthly workshops each month. So in this month, they'd have one for February specifically, and they tell you exactly what to do in your garden at that time of month. So it's really a nice check-in. And then with the rise of the internet, we always have YouTube channels, we have a lot of articles, there's a lot to Google on anything related to gardening as well. Okay, now moving into how to start your own garden. I hope we're all excited a little bit. Okay, so the first step to starting your garden is obviously considering what you want to plant. It's nice to start with plants that we like, so family favorites, just anything you can easily eat. Tomatoes are a really good example of that. And then the second thing you want to do, which is also super important, is checking what to grow depending on the season. You don't want to grow something that isn't frost tolerant in winter, for example. And these graphics show these are some warm season vegetable examples, these are some cool season vegetables. And we're slowly moving into the warm season, so you might want to look at these. And then one more thing to pay attention to is the climate zone we're in. So Redlands is in the USDA Zone 9 and the Sunset Zone 18. The sunset zones are a little bit more specific, so they tend to be a little bit more accurate here in California. And when you're checking for when to start planting, if you have a seed packet, you can check the back of that seed packet, and it'll usually have like a map like this. And then just based on where we currently are, you'll want to refer to when to plant which seeds. Okay, and the second step would be picking where to start your garden. Obviously, vegetables will require enough space, enough light, at least 6 hours per day of direct sunlight. You'll want enough water in that space and enough nutrients in the soil. So that means if your soil doesn't have enough nutrients yet, you'll really want to make sure to add some compost, which you can either buy or create yourself, and add some mulch as well. Okay, so for prepping the soil, first you'll want to clear out any rocks and debris, anything that might obstruct your plants from growing. And then when you're loosening the soil, you'll take a little shovel or a trowel, and you'll try to loosen up the soil about 8 inches deep. And while you're doing that, you'll want to add compost and all that good potting soil, because this is the important part. It will improve the water holding capacity and the drainage of your garden soil when you're adding all of those good nutrients and all of that really moist, nice soil. And if you were adding any for fertilizer, so like organic fertilizers is something we would recommend, but you'll want to add those in this step as well. And then the last step is obviously, let's start planting. So there's a choice between planting seeds from seed packets or planting actual transplants. The thing with transplants is that they're going to be a little bit more expensive at the store. If you start out with seeds, you can either start them right in the ground, at which point the success rate might be a little bit lower, so you might want to also start your seeds in like starter trays before you transplant them right into the ground. And then fifth step, let's water. So when you're watering, especially when you're doing seeds, you want to make sure that the soil remains moist before those seeds come out. Especially in California, having a lot of sun out here, we really want to make sure that we're watering enough. And it does take a little bit of water to grow things, but it does pay off. I mean, because we're producing food using this water. And also for watering, there's a variety of ways to do that. Hand watering, using a hose, using a drip system, a sprinkler system. We recommend drip system. Those are much more water efficient than using sprinklers. And when you're watering with a hose, make sure to use a nozzle just to reduce water waste. When you're watering, water in the mornings because that reduces the amount of water that's evaporating. And also we don't want to water too close to the evening because we want it to dry up before the evening. If we leave it too moist too long, that might cause diseases. Okay, and really quickly, let's go into how the current climate here in Redlands is affecting our gardening and what we can do to continue to garden. So, all over the country, climate change is causing kind of a change in our weather patterns, and especially out here in the West, we see a lot of hotter temperatures, and this causes a lot more drought stress. We see warmer winters, hotter summers, and it also alters our blooming season. So we're seeing that we're seeing blooms earlier in the spring here in California. So based on this graph, it says more than 8 days. I would think it's even a little bit larger than that. So we're seeing our blooms much earlier, and that affects also our birds and all of that. One last thing is we're seeing increased invasive species. So what that means is invasive species such as weeds. For example, now that we're seeing more nitrogen out in the air, so nitrogen is what comes out of the tailpipes out of our cars, and nitrogen is basically fertilizer. So for invasive plants, that's awesome, and they'll just use that and grow wild, and that's not great for our gardens. So what can we do in this, for example, in hotter weather, what can we do to continue our gardens and try to prevent adding more water than we have? We can apply mulch. So mulch keeps the soil from drying out. If we use a lighter mulch, such as dried up leaves, that reflects the sunlight even better. We can plant heat-tolerant varieties of plants. We can keep our weeds pulled. Weeds suck up water, which we don't want. Again, water early in the morning. Use a shade cloth if it gets too sunny, or put dry plants into the shade of taller plants. That's another good recommendation. Just little things we can do to prevent using more water and really keep our plants happy in this weather. And a couple last tips: when you're fertilizing, don't fertilize too much. Obviously that will leak into the water, and that leads to water pollution, something we don't want. And when you're buying soil, there's certain soils that contain peat, and peatlands store a lot of carbon. So when we're taking those peatlands, when we're taking that peat out of those peatlands, we're releasing that carbon, which isn't a good thing. So just to keep it there, we don't want to buy soil that contains peat. There's other great varieties of soil without that. And when we're planting, let's always plant a diverse range of plants, because with various stressors, we don't want all of those plants to die at the same time. So planting a variety is always helpful in terms of just providing a diversity of food to all kinds of plants and animals, and also dealing better with drought stress. Okay. And then lastly, this is the Sustainable University of Redlands farm. This is just a picture of what a part of our farm looks like. It's 2 acres large, so it's a little bit larger than that. But we're located at 1310 East Lagonia Avenue in Redlands, and we love to have visitors. So if you guys want to, please come visit us. We do have some flyers over at the back table. And we have an extensive composting project, which Calvin oversees. And thank you so much for listening to us today, and I hope you guys learned something. And if you're interested in receiving slides in this presentation, you can scan the QR code here.
Wow, that was great. That was really good. I really appreciate, I don't know about you, I learned a lot. But there's more to be learned because really in the question answer time is where we can really dig into specific issues. And that's what we want to move to right now. We also have another person, Betty Richards. And she come on up, she's one of our master gardeners. So Calhoun and Callie and Betty will be the answerers, you will be the questioners, but at the same time, you guys probably, some of you have had extensive gardening experience. Feel free to talk about things that worked for you, experiences, as part of a comment and or question to these folks, and they'll comment back on it. So we're just kind of open it up to questions and comments now. And I'm going to walk with this because not everybody's voice will carry. Yes.
My name is Elena. I'm a financial analyst and I'm really interested in the garden. We started our urban garden in Redlands, historical district. Our front yard is raised beds. Our backyard is food jungle. And a couple of years ago, we purchased a little piece of land, 3.5 acres in Cherry Valley. And we started planting trees. And people said, you're crazy. Because they all, you know that Cherry Valley is just cherryless now. Water is so expensive that people cannot afford to water. And that's because changes the policy and there is no agricultural rate anymore. So you guys as policymakers, that's the biggest challenge. If people plant the trees and reduce the carbon footprint, don't they deserve some benefits? Maybe helping how to water wisely, but still we need the water and we cannot afford. Another thing, even in Redlands, to keep this circle, we need a good fertilizer. We need animals, we need our chickens. Why not to change the policy and afford a few chicks? They're not so loud if you consider the cars around, the motorcycles that started, your car screaming all night. Why not allow a few chickens? Once again, you are policymakers. Make it happen.
I'm going to switch.
No, and I mean, that's one of the ways that you can go about promoting urban agriculture. If there's certain changes that you want to see in the community, any changes to policy, you have the power to get some people together, maybe talk to some other people at ANCA that feel the same way, and you can go and pursue that change, 100%.
Let me just add to that, we now have a Redlands Climate Policy Council started by Councilwoman Denise Davis. And we are working on new policies that will help with climate change. Yeah. So we love to get ideas from other people.
That was really good. Other questions, comments, or grievances, that's fine too. Yes?
This is just a question about watering. I've had my vegetable garden in my backyard, and there's lots of trees now that have grown beautifully, but they've taken away the hours of sunlight for my vegetable garden. When you say 6 hours, is that continuous or is that cumulative?
It can be different times of day, like they might get.
Sorry, you can
it's during a day.
Okay,
So, and some things, like if you're growing leafy things to eat, like lettuce, that's gonna be a little bit better for you than trying to develop a fruit like a tomato. So, leafy things.
so
Kale.
if I'm trying to grow the tomatoes, does it
Yeah.
need that 6?
Put it in your sunniest spot.
Right, so, but, so the more consistent hours, the better. Not like, I've got 3 hours of good sun in the morning, and then it moves, and then there's a 3 hours.
No, that's good.
In the
That counts,
evening.
that counts.
So cumulative is
Cumulative
okay.
is fine.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Question about the mentioning of the compost program. I'm not aware that the city of Redlands has a compost program for its residents. And does it? And if not, why not? Didn't really know that.
Well, your green waste goes and some of it gets composted and some of it gets turned into mulch. But there's a new state law, as you're probably aware, that everything, not just green waste, needs to be composted, and the city of Redlands apparently is working on that.
So they don't have a program for residents.
They have a very small one. They have 3 minuscule containers in 3 different areas of the town for people to put their stuff in and take it in a plastic bag to that container.
So that's just.
So it really is a token thing. It's not what's going to be eventually.
Yeah, they were hoping to launch the program in January. There's a new solid waste manager who's been hired to run that program, and she's very passionate about it. Some of you may have heard her speak here. I forget when that was, but yeah. So yeah, they're absolutely working on that, very committed to that. And so that will be an important part of our way of dealing with food waste, although I really want to also encourage backyard composting so we can use that beautiful soil we create in our own gardens and around our own plants here.
Just a follow-up is that, I lived in the city of Alexandria, Virginia before I moved here to Redlands. And they had a program that the city would create the compost and residents could come and pick it up on specific times of the year, on certain days, for free. One of the complaints we had about it was that many times the compost was not of a good quality. And so if we're going to start something here in Redlands, we've got to ensure that the word is out to get people and the city recycling, doing the composting, making it available for residents, because we really haven't, I'm having an issue with my soil. It's just not good quality, and it's very expensive to buy soil to put in. And it would be much better in the future to have something there for us to take advantage of.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I would also like to add again that, we have so many places that we could have composting sites that are like almost in our neighborhoods, like at schools, communities of faith, places where people go routinely is where the composting works the best. So as ANCA, we are really encouraging that to happen.
Yeah, City of Redlands, the green waste they do collect goes to One Stop Landscaping in Santa Mateo Canyon. And they create the compost. You can buy it from them. They don't, it's not free though. So the city, you're right, the city doesn't have a program, but they do take the green waste, and eventually they'll be taking the organic waste and having it composted someplace. And then you can buy it. But you might want to lobby the city about some free compost. That'd be great.
Yeah. I believe at One Stop, it may be that the mulch is free, but call them and see if you wanted some mulch. Eventually it will break down.
It's called One Stop.
One Stop.
One Stop Landscaping in Santa Mateo Canyon.
Yeah.
We just had a comment that nothing is free at One Stop, so. But, in
Okay,
fact,
so I have a question regarding composting, because even with chicken, you'll have some ligaments or some fat. And heard that that is not to be put in your compost. So then my question is, where am I supposed to put it? The fat and the ligaments.
Yeah, no, I believe that it's gonna go in the compost when this starts, when the city starts its program.
You mean in the city's
But I heard that
green
it wasn't
waste?
good- I heard that it wasn't good for compost. That's right.
Are you talking about doing it on your own?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you do it on your own, what's the recommendation?
Well, to do it on your own, it's very hard to get a really hot compost pile that's going to dependably break down all of those animal products. So probably better not try that on your own. But the city's going to have a very professional, large-scale composter that it will compost those things and take out all of the potential things that can be infectious, and it will break down the fats and
So in the
yes.
meantime, it's garbage, correct? Because I live in Redmond.
Yes, until the new, again, I don't know how soon it is to be,
I
you
do
know,
have
open to
neighbors
us.
in neighboring communities, but I would rather not have to put it in my freezer and then carry it to them.
Well, there is a place, there is 3 places that you can.
So, Marilyn?
Yeah, can I just say and I'm nobody but another citizen here. So the 3 places she mentioned you can drop off, that is not composting, that's food recycling. So that's where that stuff goes right now. That's the only answer I can give you.
7 steps.
Yeah,
It's not easy to use. I've heard that.
I'm just saying, you were asking where it should go.
Right,
So-
so I'm just saying.
We did have,
people
the
really wanna do it.
recycling coordinator for Redlands that Linda mentioned who just got hired. She came and gave a talk a few months ago, and I was talking with her, and she is overwhelmed right now with trying to implement the new California law about green waste commercially in the city that's required. So what we can say from what she was saying in December is that she's putting the procedures in place. I would expect that things will be significantly different, but exactly how, I don't know, in at least a year or less, based on what she was hoping to get off the ground. But they have to because it's becoming a law.
Yes.
Do you wanna do that?
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say that, I don't know if it's changed, but my husband was able to get free mulch, like a whole truckload full within the last year at One Stop. It's kind of like it kind of stinks for a couple days, but afterwards it's great mulch we re-landscaped with drought-tolerant plants. And anyway, but if you want fancy bark or rocks, then of course you're gonna pay. But my question is, can you explain a little bit on a home vegetable garden, the different uses of compost versus mulch, and what the mixture is and how you use them in your soil?
Good question.
Yeah, compost is more broken down, so it's composted. It has gone through the process where it's broken down into organic molecules. Mulch is not broken down at all. Eventually, as you put it on top of your garden, if it's organic mulch, meaning it's leaves or it's bark or it's wood chips or it's straw, that will eventually break down and it will enter the soil. But it just even if you mix mulch into the land, it will break down, but it will sort of absorb nutrients in order to undergo the composting process. So if you wanted to use mulch and put your wood chips or something and put it into your soil, then when you grow something, you need to put extra fertilizer on that. Eventually, the nutrients will come out again, but immediately, if you we're just starting a raised bed and you put a lot of uncomposted stuff in there, it would sort of suck up the nutrients for a while.
So you want to use the mulch on top?
The mulch goes on top.
Evaporation.
Yeah.
And then also just to kind of talk about the benefits of mulch, a lot of the time it'll really help mitigate the temperature of your soil and keep it at kind of within a range that's beneficial for the plants. So In the summer when it's scorching hot, it's 110 outside, and you're looking at your tomato plant, and you're like, how are you alive? Like, 'cause I'm not used to the 110, so I see it, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Like, how can anything grow or be alive out here? But that mulch will really, really help mitigate the temperature of that soil and help keep it cooler. But then in the winter time, when it starts getting like super rainy, cold out, it'll kind of keep it warmer. So it keeps it kind of at a good baseline range that is good for the plants. It's also really good for suppressing weeds. As we were talking, a big issue that we have in any vegetable garden, if you're using organic practices, you're probably going to have a lot of invasive weeds. They're taking nutrients from your other plants. They're going to slow down the growth. It's going to make it so if you're trying to grow something in the warm season, you have to go into the cold season and grow it because it's taking too long. So really suppressing the weeds, it's extremely helpful for doing that. And then once it does break it down, eventually it'll add more carbon back into the soil. So.
What do you think is the best animal? Yeah, I've always wondered what kind of is the best mulch to use.
So that will kind of depend on what exactly you were trying to do. I think for mitigating soil temperature and suppressing weeds, I really, really recommend just plain bark and wood chips. You want to stay away from anything that's palmy, personally, because that can take a long time to break down. If you have soil that's very, very dense and really like its pH levels are, I don't know, because you want to have like a good standard pH level for your soil. This is kind of more the environmental sciencey stuff with it. So if you have soil that's like not acidic at all to the point where it's like, this isn't really the best soil for growing plants. Certain things like twigs and like pine needles that fall from trees, any kind of a spruce tree or pine tree, those are really, really good because they're a little bit acidic when they do break down eventually. They can take a while to break down, but in the long run, it helps your soil from lacking in acidity. I think personally for stuff, if you're looking to have your mulch break down really quick and then add carbon back into the soil, I really like leaves. I feel like leaves break down a lot faster than any kind of wood chips or barky type materials. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. But if you just want to lay down mulch and sort of leave it alone, really suppress the weeds, not have to worry about it, you don't care how quick it breaks down, bark and wood chips, it's usually the most universal beneficial in my opinion.
Hello, I'm just a community volunteer. I volunteered at the Garcia Center compost area, and they need to regularly turn their compost. I just wanted to know what type of composting that we are doing currently. Do we need to turn it, and do we require volunteers? And can our volunteers, further, get more benefit by taking that compost from volunteering?
When you say like what kind of compost we're doing, do you mean like what kind of stuff like we do at like our work site or the city? Because I'm not too knowledgeable about a lot of the city's practices. I know that we don't have our composting program nearly to where we want to get it according to the state law. So what just?
Like the kind of level of, like, is it verma, composting? Is it the one that you turn the pile composting? What kind of composting is it?
I think the stuff that we would be doing at the city, like, and other local municipalities kind of in our area like to do, it's usually more hot composting. They will turn it. A lot of the times it's not vermiculture. I think at UC Riverside, they're really, really big on vermiculture and worm bin composting. But kind of the most practical form of composting that you would do, like just at home, would either be vermiculture, so worm bins. We're actually having a worm bin oh yeah, here we go. We're having a worm bin composting workshop. So if you want to come to this, like Neil Flyers over here, highly recommend go check out that table. But that's something that you can do. It's extremely practical. Really, you just have to make sure that your worms don't like die from heat in the peak of the summer and from the cold in the peak of the winter. I would say like the stuff that we do that I think is very practical that a lot of people can do is just basic lasagna aerobic style composting. You just take your green waste food scraps, you can throw them down, really just throw them on the floor or the ground, whatever. And then just as long as you're mixing in brown waste with that, because you need the brown waste with it for the decomposition process. Otherwise, it's just gonna rot and attract fruit flies and smell bad. So make sure you have the brown waste, and you can continuously flip it and mix it in. I think the best brown waste to add for just at-home composting would be leaves. Like I was saying, it breaks down a lot faster. And if you add enough of them, everything else will break down fast too. So.
Thank you.
I promise I talk loud.
Okay, someone talk loud.
When you're growing all your crops at the ULR, do you have to let the ground rest between crops eventually?
Yes, we do, and we're currently in the process of doing that with one of our kind of fields. Usually what we do is we have sort of enough workforce power to manage, say like a couple of fields at a time, or I don't know, we're able to kind of focus on different areas throughout the farm, but usually we'll always have one field that is resting, and then we'll move to it, and then maybe we'll let the other field rest. So for example, over the summer we had this one big plot that was filled with all these invasive weeds, and we just could not get rid of the weeds. It was super annoying. So we solarized it over the summer, cooked out all the nutrients of the soil, but also killed all the weeds in the process. So letting the soil rest, but then going back, adding compost on top of it, mixing it back into the soil. Really, soil mitigation is the most important thing you can do for plant growth, in my opinion. We are kind of in a desert, so the soil isn't exactly friendly.
You don't have to let it rest though. In fact, there's some newer way of farming. They're finding that you try to keep roots in the ground at all times because it keeps the life of the soil going. So yeah, go from one crop to the other. In winter, you can plant some peas, something that actually adds nitrogen to the soil and grows well during the winter. So yeah, more and more farmers are recommending that you know, it's being recommended to farmers to have roots in the ground all the time.
Don't plant tomato after tomato after tomato.
Right, do change your crop, yeah.
Speaking of soil, I have a question. This city's named Red Lands, and in our backyard, we have red lands. It's like clay. And I imagine others have encountered that. You know, you could make pottery with it, but in terms of gardening, what's the best way to handle this really dense clay soil?
It does not drain.
Yeah, to add organic matter.
Just organic, yeah, just churn it up.
When you're digging holes for something, like planting a tree or something, you really want to dig a large enough hole to get that nice organic matter mixed in well enough.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit there because that tree's going to it's going to be big. You can't dig a big enough hole to cover where the roots need to go. So the tree really has to get used to that soil. Otherwise, if you have this wonderful organic, you know, high organic soil in this hole, the roots are just going to stay right there. They're going to like that. They're not going to spread out. So you have to be careful there. But yeah, you may just have to find a tree that puts up with your clay.
So if I have a 5-gallon apricot tree that I'm looking to plant, what size hole would you recommend that I dig?
Usually planting a tree, the main thing is to make a hole large enough that you don't have to, that you can get down on the side of it. So the recommendation is like twice as wide as the pot was. So you can work in there. And then just as deep. Okay, you don't want to, if you loosen it too much below, then you plant the plant and it will probably sink, and then you'll have the plant in sort of a hole, which you don't want. You want, if anything, the stem, the crown, to be a little bit above the, you know, maybe a ½ inch, not a lot, but you don't want it down in a hole where you water it and all the water goes right there it's gonna rot the roots.
Last week, we had a tree planting thing I went to from ANCA, and when she had made the hole, ahead of time with some water, and then she was gonna plant this tree, somebody ran to the car to get the soil nutrients or something, you know, big bag. She goes, oh no. So she's saying what you're saying. You kind of want the tree in the soil that's natural, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's
You don't
gonna have
want
to
to
adapt,
get
it's gonna have to
nutrients because
adapt to that soil.
it has to learn to live in its climate and its soil.
Yeah, your fruit tree, once it's in there and ready to grow, once it's adapted to your hole, yeah, fruit trees are gonna require fertilizer. Way back, way
When
out.
she first planted it, she didn't want to put a lot of fertilizer.
Was this a fruit tree?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's not ready for fertilizer at that point.
We
Once
have
it starts
some,
putting
tree-
out its leaves.
Our tree seminar that we had, you might recall that there was recommendations for trees that are heat resistant, so we can't park.
Yeah, for our area.
For our area, so be aware that those resources are available too, to know which type of tree to do the best.
So just so I understand the different terms, for my 5-gallon paper cut tree, should I use soil amendment mixed in when I'm filling the hole back in? And is that different than fertilizer?
Yeah, I would say no.
They would say yes.
And just so I understand sort of what is sort of the process that's happening, just so I can appreciate the decision of what I'm doing and not doing. Is the soil amendment somehow enriching, but you don't want to necessarily deprive it of the opportunity to really understand what the native conditions are going to be? And so that's sort of the, like, could I just do a 5-part native to 1 part soil amendment, or, is it 1-to-1, or, just sort of what's the philosophy?
Well, I would say you don't need a soil amendment. I would say that you don't need a soil amendment. Your tree's gonna have to adapt to the soil that is there. The soil of your yard, whatever is there is gonna, because just right in that little spot, it might love it, but the roots might just stay there and you'll end up, yeah.
And so is that different for my home garden when I plant my tomatoes and vegetables? Different philosophy?
Yeah, different philosophy. Lots of organic material in your soil.
So
Yeah, a
if
tree,
have a
you know, if
basic
you-
tree and then a fruit tree would get more organic.
No.
No.
I mean, the trees are big. You can't excavate enough soil to give the tree,
Okay.
yeah, you can't dig that big a hole. If you can, wipe away your whole yard and put in some good soil. But,
Yeah, big drops. Right.
More questions? Marilyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. So if I think I'm in the process of improving soil in any area of my yard, so there's maybe organic material or compost or mulch going on top, but when I dig, I'm not seeing any earthworms. Are there any shortcuts? Like, can I go buy night crawlers, or how can I introduce earthworms?
they will come if you put enough organic material in the soil and it's moist.
What if I think they're gone from that?
There's a lot of places to buy worms, and you can do that, but if you throw them into soil that hasn't been treated effectively and it's not really good soil and there's not any organic matter in the soil or drainage, it's like that red clay stuff that we're talking about, they're not gonna last long.
Suicide mission.
Side mission.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah. Whoops. Linda, you were pointing to somebody. Oh,
I have,
okay, and then you did.
back to my garden. First of all, real quickly, what kind of leaves? I have an olive tree that drops leaves that don't seem to, do they break down just fine, or what kind of leaves?
I mean, I can't really speak to the specific kinds of leaves that you would want broken down. Most of the leaves that we have on our work site break down very quickly whenever we use them in our compost. I think like certain leaves, like if you get like leaves falling down from palm trees, I just know that palms usually take a lot longer to decompose and they're not good for composting. But most kinds of leaves that you find should be good. I just know pine needles, they take a little bit longer too, they can add acidity, so. But I feel like an olive tree should be fine.
Iris leaves and tulip leaves, which are long and thin, would those break down as well?
I think it has more to do with the thickness of the leaf.
Okay.
You know, so if you have like a leaf from a liquid amber tree, you know, that's really, really thin. But an olive tree, it's a little thicker, and iris leaf is quite thick,
Yeah.
and, you know, palm just, you know, doesn't break down at all well, and that's why they don't have you put it in your greenways. If you're not aware of that, you should be, that, you know, keep the palm stuff out of your greenways, because it, you know, they have to pull it out at the recyclers.
Okay, I think one more question, Dick?
Yeah, I wondered where you can get your soil tested. Is there any place, what test would you recommend for soil? Would you
Yeah.
say it's the best for a garden, or vegetable garden versus maybe putting in a tree? Is there, I don't know if there's any option we have there, but on a vegetable garden, you have options for testing your soil.
Yeah. You know, there's a couple tests you can do yourself, which is a drainage test to see, you know, that you have pure clay, and it takes, you know, like 24 hours to drain. And that's simple. You just dig a hole and you know, fill it with water, and then fill it with water again after it soaks in, and then you see how long it takes. And, you know, if it takes like 1 minute or less, you know, you have really sandy soil, and you're going to have to, you know, it's going to be a problem keeping water in that. If it, you know, it's been, you know, 24 hours and it's only gone halfway down, then you know that, yeah, this is poorly draining soil, and you might have to think about how you go about using that and how you water it. You know, it's going to hold water a lot longer, and the sand is not. So when you end up watering that tree that's in really sandy soil, you do it more often than if it was in, you know, in clayey soil. So, yeah. Other things, you know, for the most part, you don't have to do a lot of tests. You can do a simple pH, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate by a little kit you can get at a big box store. And that'll tell you most of what you need to know. If you are afraid that you maybe have some heavy metal contaminants in your soil or something, you know that there was some sort of industry there, you might want to send it off to somebody for more extensive testing. But for the most part, you know, for a home gardener, you don't need to do a lot of more testing than that. Also, how much organic material is in your soil. And you can do that by various tests too, just at home, you know, seeing how it holds together when you squeeze wet soil. Also putting it in a jar and filling it with water and shaking it up and seeing how it'll settle out into layers with sand and then silt and then organic. And so there's things like that, and we can send you that information. If you just email us at the Master Gardener site, we can send you some pictures of how to do those tests.
Okay, remember, if you have more questions, Master Gardeners are going to be right back here.